All right, before I allow direct here, let me just inquire of the officer now that you're under oath. These trial proceedings have been live streamed and open to the public. Have you been observing any of the testimony that's been provided in trial up to this point?
No, sir.
Okay, and have you discussed with anyone else the testimony they've provided at trial?
No, sir.
All right, thanks for your responses. Ms. Beatty, you may inquire on direct.
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Pillar, can you please state your full name and then spell your last name?
Yes, it is Ryan Pillar. Last name is spelled P as in Paul, Illar.
Where are you currently employed?
I'm employed with the Town of Gilbert Police Department.
And what state is the town of Gilbert in?
It is in the state of Arizona, Maricopa County.
How long have you been employed by the Gilbert Police Department?
I was employed February 2007 and have been with them for a little over 17 years.
Have you had any other law enforcement jobs prior to your experience with the Gilbert Police Department?
No, ma'am.
Can you briefly describe your training that you've had to become a police officer?
When first hired, I attended an 18-week Arizona Law Enforcement Academy, followed by an 18-week field training. And then I was a patrol officer for 9 years, where I received hundreds of hours of continuous training to include arrest procedures, state laws, firearms training, basic investigations and interrogations. In August of 2016, I lateral moved to our Special Victims Unit within our Criminal Investigations Division, where I was a detective and I received training in interview and interrogation, crime scene. I spent a week-long training with child crimes investigations. I also went to a week-long forensic interview training. In August of 2019, I lateral moved to our Violent Crimes Unit, which is focused on investigating robberies, homicides, and violent crimes. I received another 5-day training with homicide investigations and interviewing techniques, as well as crime scene investigations. I'm now back on patrol work voluntarily and working within the school programs within Gilbert, Arizona.
So your current job title is you're an officer with the Gilbert Police Department.
That is correct. I'm a police officer.
What was your job title in 2019?
In 2019, I was a violent crimes detective.
Can you briefly describe your job duties as a violent crimes detective?
As a violent crimes detective, we investigated crimes that are related to violence, death investigations of any kind, homicides, and robberies, anything that would potentially lead to a death or a serious physical injury sustained to a victim.
Were you on duty as a violent crimes detective on October 2nd of 2019?
Yes.
Did you respond to an attempted shooting of a gentleman named Brandon Boudreaux that day?
Yes, I did.
Approximately what time was that?
About 9:13 in the morning is when the initial call for service kicked out.
And did you go to a location?
Yes, 3875 East Phelps Street in Gilbert, Arizona.
And whose residence or what place was that?
It was soon learned that it was the residence of Mr. Brandon Boudreaux.
When you arrived at the scene, what was your role?
Upon arrival to the scene with fellow detectives, I took the primary investigator role, which is the lead detective for that particular investigation.
And when you're the lead detective of any investigation, what are your responsibilities?
Initially, it is to task fellow detectives with their duties, and then as the primary investigator, it's to interview the involved parties, in this case, the victims and witnesses.
Are part of your duties as a lead detective to make determinations about next steps and directions that the investigation should go?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, when you arrived at the scene on October 2nd of 2019, did you make contact with Mr. Boudreaux?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you talk to him without getting into any narrative or any specific statements he made to you? Did you discuss the incident with him?
Yes.
Based on your discussion with him, were you able to ascertain what had happened?
Yes.
Did you have any other discussions with anybody else at the scene or in the area?
Yes. Part of the duty, again, was tasking other detectives with canvassing the areas and speaking with witnesses. There was evidence at the scene to include in the roadway some shards of glass. Mr. Boudreau's vehicle was parked in front of his residence. It had evidence that it did in fact sustain damage from a projectile. And witnesses at the scene confirmed a vehicle was idling in front of Mr. Boudreau's residence prior to shooting occurring.
Okay, so let's walk back just a little bit. When you describe seeing Mr. Boudreau's vehicle, were you able to ascertain where this shooting had occurred, where Mr. Boudreau was?
Yes.
Where was Mr. Boudreau when the shooting had occurred?
Mr. Boudreau was driving his vehicle westbound on Phelps Street, approaching his residence.
And you mentioned that a projectile hit the vehicle. What do you mean by projectile?
Bullet.
Okay. And where was that bullet mark on Mr. Boudreau's vehicle?
It was up in the A pillar of the door frame, near the windshield. The damage itself actually caused the windshield, or excuse me, the front driver's side window to fracture, crack, and ultimately shatter. And then there was a hole within the B pillar.
And you personally observed that at the scene?
Yes, ma'am.
After discussing what had happened with Mr. Boudreau and other individuals at the scene, were you able to get a description of a suspect or suspect vehicle?
Yes.
What was the description that you got?
From Mr. Boudreau and witnesses, it was a darker color or gray colored Jeep that was parked facing westbound and eastbound lanes in front of Mr. Boudreau's residence, or near the front of his residence. This Jeep was a Jeep described as a Jeep Wrangler, and specifically it did not have a wheel affixed to the back of the vehicle, which is standard for Jeep Wranglers to have a spare tire affixed to the back of the vehicle.
Did you learn anything about the license plate of that Jeep?
Yes, additionally, with the color and description of the physicals of it, it was described by Mr. Boudreau that it was a Texas license plate that was affixed to the back of this vehicle.
Based on your discussions with Mr. Boudreau and other individuals at the scene and the description of the suspected Jeep, were you able to take that investigation in any specific direction?
Yes.
And what was that?
From interviews and the vehicle description, I reached out to the Chandler Police Department detectives because it was learned that a homicide happened in their jurisdiction in July of 2019. So I'm sorry.
I apologize. Could you briefly tell the jury where Chandler is in reference to Gilbert?
Yes. Chandler, Arizona is adjacent to Gilbert, Arizona. We refer to it as a sister city. So it's right next to Gilbert, within Maricopa County.
And you described learning about a homicide that had occurred in
Yes.
Chandler. What was the significance of that homicide to your investigation?
So upon learning about the Chandler homicide, it was learned that family members of Brandon's wife at the time, Melanie Boudreau, were present at that Chandler homicide scene, as well as a couple vehicles.
And when you say Brandon's wife, Melanie, do you know what the status of his relationship with Melanie was at the time?
His relationship with Melanie Boudreau at the time is marriage. They were married. They were in the process of a divorce that was near finalization.
Was there anything you learned about that homicide investigation or that death that occurred in Chandler that was applicable to this case or the vehicle specifically that was at the scene?
Yes, the Chandler investigation learned that the decedent was a gentleman by the name of Charles Vallow, who was married to Melanie Boudreau's aunt, Lori Vallow Daybell. Present at that scene as well was Lori's brother, Alexander Cox. It was learned that a vehicle at the Chandler crime scene was a dark colored gray Jeep with a Texas license plate that was registered to the decedent, Charles Vallow.
At that time, were you able to develop a person of interest with regard to that Jeep?
Yes.
Based on the information that you had as the lead detective, who was that person of interest?
Person of interest was Alexander Cox.
What further steps did you take in that investigation with regard to the Jeep?
From the Jeep information and the license plate that we've confirmed, we reviewed LPR hits. LPR is an acronym for license plate reader. And we were able to track the movements of that Texas license plate on that Jeep with photographs to confirm it was still on the Jeep, moving from the state of Arizona to the state of Idaho.
And did you determine what dates that had occurred?
Yes.
What were those dates?
Those dates were just prior to and after the shooting in Gilbert, Arizona.
Were you able to determine where in Idaho the Jeep had traveled from?
Yes.
Where was that?
It traveled to and from the area of Rexburg, Idaho.
And were you able to determine whether or not Alex Cox had a connection to Rexburg?
Yes, it was soon learned that he was residing in Rexburg, Idaho.
Okay. At some time, did you begin coordinating with law enforcement agencies in the Rexburg area?
Yes, once it was learned the Jeep was located in the area, we reached out to Rexburg Police Department and Fremont County Sheriff's Office. Fremont County Sheriff's Office, sorry.
At some point in time, did yourself or any of the law enforcement agencies you were working with obtain a search warrant on that Jeep?
Yes.
When was that?
The Rexburg Police Department was able to locate and confirm the Jeep was at an apartment complex in their area, and they executed a search warrant in mid-November, November 18th.
Were you present when that search warrant was executed?
Yes.
Can you briefly describe what took place during the execution of that search warrant?
Myself and a crime scene specialist flew up from Arizona directly to Rexburg. We went to Rexburg's property evidence building where the Jeep was secured. I stood by with my crime scene specialist as she processed the vehicle. Processing included taking exterior photographs, opening the vehicle, taking interior photographs, and then she collected physical evidence to include DNA swabs in areas that would have the most contact by the operator, some physical items from within the Jeep, and then collected from the back of the vehicle GSR, which is an acronym for gunshot residue evidence, because we believe this vehicle to be our suspect vehicle and the shooting occurred from outside the back window.
And what did you do with those samples that you retrieved from the vehicle?
These samples were packaged individually from each location where it was collected, and then it was ultimately impounded for evidence and then forwarded to the respective crime labs within Arizona for processing.
And did you have any more, did you do anything else with regard to the Jeep at that time?
No, once the Jeep was processed per the search warrant, it was turned over back to the Rexburg Police Department where it remained in custody.
At some point in time, did your investigation into the attempted shooting of Brandon Boudreaux shift?
Yes.
Why was that?
Because working with Rexburg Police Department, Fremont County Sheriff's Office, and Chandler Police Department still, as well as the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, it was learned that children belonging to Lori Vallow Daybell had not been seen or heard from for quite some time.
When did that shift occur?
It occurred in shortly after the processing of the Jeep. It was late November. I believe it was November 26th, was when the focus really changed.
Did you take any steps on the Arizona side of things to locate these children?
Yes.
Can you describe those steps that you took?
Myself and fellow detectives began interviewing associates and family members of the involved parties. We set up surveillance to include pole cams, which is discrete cameras that are affixed to a light pole, for example. These cameras were located in locations to monitor friends and family believed to have custody of, at this time, JJ and or Tylee Ryan.
In addition to the pole cams, did you do anything else?
Contacted other family members and associates.
Yes. Were you able to determine whether or not those children were ever in Arizona in November and December of 2019?
Upon review of all surveillance and all interviews, no, there was no indication either child was in the state of Arizona.
Now, at this time in late November and early December of 2019, were you still investigating Alex Cox for the attempted shooting of Brandon Boudreaux?
Yes.
What were you What did that investigation look like at that time?
Gilbert Police Department, as well as other agencies, were keeping our eye on Alex Cox. With my investigation in particular, we were tracking his movements.
I know, I apologize for interrupting. When was that?
This was in early December of 2019.
And you were surveilling Alex Cox.
Correct.
How often were you surveilling him?
It was learned that he was back in Arizona, Gilbert in particular, and we were surveying him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
And in December of 2019, did you stop surveilling Alex Cox for any reason?
December 12th, 2019, yes.
Why did you stop surveilling Alex Cox on that date?
Alex Cox died on the 12th of December of 19.
After Alex Cox died on December 12th of 2019, did you execute a search warrant on his residence or vehicle?
Yes,
What day was that?
it was the same day of his death.
Did you find anything of evidentiary value in Alex Cox's home?
Yes, in his residence, he had multiple munitions and some firearms. He also had indicia to show that he lived in the residence, ID identification, clothing items. And then he had some literature, multiple books of literature authored by Mr. Chad Daybell.
And did you find anything of evidentiary value in his vehicle?
Yes, there was paraphernalia to include holsters and ammunitions within Alex Cox's pickup truck. And there was a letter that was found also within his pickup truck.
What was that letter?
It was a patriarch blessing authored by Chad Daybell.
And who was it directed to? If
Alexander Cox.
I may have just a moment, Your Honor.
You may.
And Your Honor, I have no further questions for this witness.
All right, before cross, just a quick sidebar with counsel, if I may. All right, thanks, counsel. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, there's one issue I need to address with the witness and counsel outside of your presence. In lieu of taking a full-on break, if we could just have you retire to the back hallway here for literally 5 minutes or less. We'll come back on and then we'll take our lunch break at noon. So let's just have the jurors excused just very briefly.
All right, please.
All right, thank you. Please be seated. Directs concluded. Just very briefly, counsel, I was reminded at a former trial in the case versus Lori Vallow, one of the Arizona officers, and I'm not entirely remembering if it was Officer Pillar, but made some type of a kind and thanked the jury or something on the way out, which raised an objection by the defense. And I thought it was perhaps at least had the appearance of impropriety. So I just wanted to inquire and make sure that no passing comments were made at the conclusion of the witness's testimony to that effect, because we're just trying to keep the jurors as impartial as possible.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that's all I wanted to address, and we just didn't know a better way to do that with the jurors here. So with that, we'll just have the jurors brought right back in. We can continue with cross then, Mr. Pryor.
Thank you, Judge.
All right, so if the jurors can return. All right, Mr. Pryor, you can commence with cross-examination if you'd like.
You spoke about having coordination with the folks in Rexburg, the folks in Chandler, Arizona,
Yes, sir.
you at Gilbert, Arizona. Would you agree with me that the common denominator of all of these matters is Alex Cox and Lori Vallow?
For the Gilbert investigation, Alex Cox was our primary focus. Yes.
And Lori Vallow as well.
Yes, she came into play with being Alex's sister.
Right. And those are the ones that are implicated in the Gilbert, Arizona case. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then as far as Charles Vallow is concerned, the murder of Charles Vallow, are you aware that, again, it's Alex Cox and Lori Vallow who are implicated in the murder of Charles Vallow?
Yes, for the Chandler, Arizona case.
Okay. And the evidence that you found in the Jeep were 2 of Chad's books.
No books of Chad's were found in the Jeep. No.
That's it, right?
No books were found in the
Oh,
Jeep.
no books. were
No,
found.
sir.
Oh, okay. Judge, that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, any redirect?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Is this witness going to be recalled by the state or the defense?
Not by the state, Your Honor.
No, Judge, thank you.
Okay, you're released from any subpoena. Thank you for appearing and testifying today, Officer Pilar.